Tanisha, what I'll do is I'll do the welcome, the roll call, the approval of the minutes, read the names of the translators, and then turn it to you to give a welcome and to go. All right, good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Exam School Admissions Task Force. Because this is a remote session, I will ask Ms. Parvex to call the roll, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Contempasis. Mr. Acevedo.
Here.
Ms. Aguirre. Ms. Aguirre? I think you're...
Sorry, yeah, I was mute, sorry. Here.
Thank you. Mr. Kreger. Mr. Kreger? I could...
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Freeman Wisdom.
Here.
Ms. Grassa.
Here.
Ms. Lam.
Here.
Ms. Nagasawa.
Here.
Ms. Garrett.
Present.
Oh, there. Ms. Tang.
Here.
Ms. Wade. She emailed me. She can't be here today. Ms. Sullivan.
Present.
And Mr. Contempasis.
Present.
Thank you. Everyone is here except Ms.
Thank you, Ms. Parvex. We are pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean, Portuguese, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Somali, and American Sign Language. After I finish introducing the interpreters, we will activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. Click the icon to select your language preference. Beginning with the Spanish interpreter this evening is Randolph Dominguez. Will you please invite our Spanish-speaking audience to switch their Zoom channel in Spanish? And bring welcome, please.
Good evening, Mr. Contempasis. Good evening, everyone. My name is Randolph Dominguez. I'm going to be your Spanish interpreter for today. Muy buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Mi nombre es Randolph Dominguez y voy a ser su intérprete en el idioma español para el día de hoy. Para poder accesar su canal en español, en la parte inferior de su pantalla van a encontrar un globo. Este globo como un globo terráqueo. Ahí van a por favor pulsar, van a seleccionar el idioma español y así van a poder accesar el idioma español de manera simultánea. También si ustedes están utilizando un celular deben de pulsar los 3 puntos a su mano superior derecha. Si no tienen el Zoom más actualizado, deben de ir a www.zoom.usa raya inclinada update y ahí pueden actualizar su Zoom. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, sir. Our Cape Verdean interpreter this evening is Maria Gomes. Will you please, Ms. Gomes, give the Zoom instructions in Cape Verdean?
Boa tarde, meu nome é Maria Gomes e também falo na língua de Cabo Verde. Por favor, na teclado, bota bem na claro que está globo, bota cálcula para ouvir aquela reunião ali na língua crioulo. Obrigado.
Thank you. Our Portuguese interpreter is Christiane Leitner. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Portuguese?
Olá, boa noite. Se você precisa de interpretação em português brasileiro, você pode encontrar o canal português clicando no globo na parte inferior da tela e escolher o canal em português. Se você estiver usando um telefone celular, você precisa clicar nos 3 pontinhos e ali você vai encontrar os canais em diferentes línguas, é só escolher português. Obrigada.
Thank you. Our Vietnamese interpreter is Vi Lee. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Vietnamese?
Hi, good evening. My name is Vi Phương Ly. I'm the Vietnamese interpreter. Kính chào quý vị, tôi tên là Vi, tôi sẽ là thông dịch viên của quý vị vào buổi tối ngày hôm nay. Xin quý vị nhìn thấy ở dưới màn hình có cái quả cầu và bấm vào tiếng Việt để có thể nghe được thông dịch viên nói chuyện. Nhưng mà để được có cái phần này thì quý vị phải có cái phần mềm của Zoom mới nhất để có thể nghe được những gì đàm thoại ngày hôm nay. Cảm ơn quý vị rất nhiều. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Mandarin interpreter is Tina Wong. Ms. Wong, will you give the instructions, please?
Thank you. 你好，各位，我是您的普通话翻译，我叫 Tina 王。那么一会儿您会看到他们出来这个地球仪字样的时候，那么请您选这个 Chinese。我的频道会写的是中文频道，他们粤语频道会写粤语频道，所以你想听中文，请选这个 Chinese 就好了。好，一会儿见，多保重。Thank you.
Thank you. Our Cantonese interpreter is Ki Yi Su. Joan, will you please give the Zoom instructions in Cantonese?
Hi, my name is Kai Yi. I will be your Cantonese interpreter today. 各位你哋好，我係嘉怡，今日咧會為你哋做廣東話嘅翻譯㗎。如果咧你係想選擇咧廣東話嘅頻道咧，請你喺呢個 Zoom 嘅畫面下邊咧有一個地球儀嘅標誌，撳落去之後咧你可以選取廣東話嘅頻道㗎。咁咧我就會為你做今晚做翻譯㗎。唔該晒 ，Thank you。
Thank you. Our Haitian Creole interpreter is Frandy Matthew. Will you please give the Zoom instructions?
Good evening, everybody. This is Frandy Matthew, the Haitian Creole interpreter. Bonsoir tout le monde. Non, moi, c'est Frandy Mathieu. Moi, là, pour me traduire pour nous dans la réunion à soir qu'a fait avec l'école Boston, le public Boston. Si nous avons une question, nous sommes capables d'écrire pour que le monde parle dans le chat là. Et moi, là, pour interpréter pour nous, n'importe question bien concerne la guerre. Merci.
Thank you, sir. Our Somali interpreter is Camilla Jamal.
Hello, good afternoon. How are you doing? My name is Camila. I'm going to be your interpreter today. Magacayga waa Camila Fortune. Maanta waxaa idin noqon doonaa sabaftirihiina wixii su'aalaha qabtaan ama sharaxaada meesha ka bixin doona dhegeysan kartiin haddaa ii baahan tihiin qolka Soomaaliga iga heli kartiin marka waa soo dhawaada. Thank you.
Thank you. That completes the introduction of all of our translators for this evening. I would like to now move to the approval of the minutes, which you task force members have received. The first is the minutes of the March 13th meeting. The co-chair will ask for a motion to accept.
I move.
A second?
I second.
All in favor signify by raising your hand.
I believe, Mr. Condon-Passos, we may need a roll call vote.
Oh, thank you.
No problem.
Ms. Parvik, will you please read the roll on the minutes
Yes,
for
no problem.
March 13th?
Could I? One moment. I wonder, was the motion on which set of minutes?
Was the first one on the 13th.
Okay.
I'm going to call for the 16th.
Thank you. Okay.
I believe actually we can do both at the same time.
Okay. Then I will call for a separate motion for the minutes of the 16th. May I have the motion, please?
I think what Ms. Parvex was suggesting is that we could, if the body was so inclined, we could have a unified motion to accept both the March 13th and March 16th minutes.
I so move.
Second?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Parvex, will you please read the roll?
Thank you very much, Mr. Condon-Passos. Mr. Acevedo?
Yay.
Ms. Aguirre?
Yay.
Mr. Krager?
Yay.
Dr. Freeman Wisdom?
Yay.
Ms. Grassa?
Yay.
Ms. Lam?
Yay.
Ms. Nagasawa?
Yay.
Ms. Garrett?
Yay.
Ms. Tang?
Yay.
Ms. Sullivan?
Yes.
And Mr. Condon-Passos?
Yes.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. I now would like to turn it over to co-chair Ms. Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Contreras. I want to say good afternoon to everyone. It is good to have yet again great participation. I want to, as always, thank in advance our interpreters for the hard work that they'll do over the course of this meeting. I do want to just refer us to our agenda. We are today going to take some time to review as a task force the temporary exam school policy that is in place for the upcoming school year, for admission for the upcoming school year 21-22. And then we're going to take some time to walk through an overview of some of what's happening in other parts of the country relative to selective school admissions, and also take some time to walk through a couple of the elements that we need to, as a task force, just keep in mind as we start to move closer to putting pen to paper, virtual pen to paper, to develop a recommendation for the school committee. So with that, I want to invite Monica Roberts. She will join both co-chair Contreras and I in walking through what is currently in place for the admissions policy. Ms. Roberts.
Good evening, and I think my colleague is going to share the slides for us.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So tonight we will do again a recap of our current admissions policy for this year, and you can go to the next slide, please. Again, this is a one-year policy. And after this school year, the district, based on the school committee vote, would revert to the current policy, the standing policy that has been in place for some time. As we know, the work of this task force is to make a recommendation on the long-term policy. This is, again, a suspension, and as we look at eligibility, it is in keeping with the existing policy and historical practice, where all Boston residents in grades 6, 8, or 9 are eligible to be able to apply for exam school admissions, regardless of their school type, be it charter, homeschool, parochial, or private, or BPS. They do need to meet one of two eligibility criteria and requirements, and that is either to have a B average in ELA and math on the last school years. So there have been two school years ago, fall and winter marking terms, or have received a meeting or exceeds expectations on the 2019 ELA and math MCAS. Again, this is not a both and provision. Students only had to meet one of these to get into the eligibility pool. Next slide, please.
One moment, Monica. The other piece to that is the verification.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. So as part of our process, we are asking schools, A, to verify grades, so they're submitting transcripts, and B, to verify that those grades are reflective of the student performing at grade level based on a Massachusetts curriculum standards. So that is something that we've asked for applicants, schools to sign off on.
So Ms. Roberts, if I may, just so that we're all clear, this is to create the pool of eligible applicants.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we're going to move next to the invitation process, so to determine who is actually invited to attend an exam school. So the invitations to exam schools will be done through two mechanisms, both of which, again, use the prior report card grades, or GPA, from the fall and winter term of last year. So 20% of seats will be distributed by straight rank of the GPA across the city. So it'll be a citywide ranking of applicants. and 20% of the seats across the 3 exam schools will be distributed to those who are highest ranking across the city. Secondly, 80% of seats will be distributed using a combination of student GPA and zip code. We'll go a little bit into more detail in the next slide.
So I'm sorry, before we move to the next slide, I want to make sure that that's clear. So 20% of the seats in each exam school invitations are extended based on straight ranking of the GPA.
Yes, citywide.
Citywide. Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. So we'll start with the process with identifying students for 20% of the seats at each exam school. So students, again, will be ranked citywide based on GPA. The students with the highest GPAs would be placed in their first choice school. Where students might be ranked the same, they will receive a random number, which will be used to determine the order in which they are placed. In this process, students will only be placed in their first choice school. And the reason for this is that students will have another opportunity to get their top choice school in the second process. Given that the top ranking students will be among the highest ranked across the city, they will also be among the highest ranked within their zip code, and therefore likely to get their first choice seat in the second process. I don't know, Madam Chair, if you have any questions on this or any further clarifications.
One moment, please. No, that is clear. And so the only time a random number is assigned is if there are 2 or more students who have the exact same GPA.
Yeah, that is the only time a random number would be used, is if 2 or more students had the exact same GPA.
Thank you. Okay.
Next slide, please. So now we're going to turn to the process for the 80% of invitations, the 80% of seats and the remainder of invitations across the 3 exam schools. So each zip code will be allocated a number of seats based on the proportion of school-age children living in that zip code. This is not a set number of seats at each school. It is a set of overall invitations that will be distributed based on the preference of the applicant. Students will be placed into an applicant pool for their zip code, and they will be ranked by GPA. Again, where students their GPA is the exact same, then we would assign a random number to determine in what order they then are extended an invitation. We will hold 10 assignment rounds, and in each round, we would distribute 10% of the seats available to each zip code. The zip codes will be ordered from lowest median family income with children under the age of 18 to that with the highest median family income with children under the age of 18. Students from the zip code with the lowest median family income with children under the age of 18 will be placed first, followed by the next zip code in the order. If a student's first choice school is not available, then they are offered their second choice school. If that is not available, then their third choice school. I'm going to pause and see if there are any additional clarifications, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yes. So let's go back to the top. So with respect to the 80% of invitations, students are still, there's the GPA requirement.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So with respect to the zip codes, can you just clarify, where did we get kind of or how are we able to determine the minimum number of seats that would be allocated or for students who are living in a particular zip code? How does that happen?
Yeah, and I'll invite my colleague Monica Hogan to support me in this. But the data for the percentage of families, the median family income with students under the age of 18 in terms of how many families are within that zip code, I believe was provided by our partners at the Boston Planning and Development, I want to call it association, or might be
So let me ask, so actually, if you don't mind, Ms. Roberts, I'm going to ask Ms. Hogan if she could possibly respond to this question.
No. So both the income data and the percentage of school-aged children are both from the American Community Survey. This is an annual survey done as part of the census process. And so the data that is used for both of these is a 5-year average from between 2014 and 2018, because those were the most recent 5-year average available at the time of developing this policy. And so our partners at BPDA, the Boston Planning and Development Agency, did that analysis for us from data from the census, showing the income and the percentage of school-aged children by zip code.
By zip code, thank you. So once it is determined the percentage of school-aged children living in a particular zip code, once that percentage is determined, then did you take the number of available seats at exam schools, or how did you determine how many seats are assigned?
So each year we go through a process to determine how many seats are available at every school in BPS, not just at the exam schools, through a process we call projections. And so through that process, it's determined how many invitations will be sent. And so once you have that number, 20% of those seats are allocated through the 20% process. And then the remaining 80%, whatever that number is, would be multiplied by the percentage of school-aged children.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And so all of the students from the pool who have not otherwise already been assigned to or accepted an invitation to be assigned to an exam school, they're all then kind of put into their respective zip codes, neighborhoods, and they are then rank ordered by GPA.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. So they're rank ordered by GPA. When it comes to the allocation, when it comes to, could you talk a little bit about when it comes to basically who selects first for a seat, meaning which neighborhood or which zip code selects first? Could you just repeat this piece with respect to the median family income? How does that play into this?
Yeah. So the zip codes will be ranked from the zip code with the lowest median family income to that with the highest median family income. And as we do the distribution of 10% of seats per round, the first zip code, that with the lowest median family income, those students will be placed first up to the number of seats available in that round, so up to 10% of the seats, in order of highest GPA going downward.
So in each zip code, in each neighborhood, in each round, it's the student with the highest GPA that select the students with the highest GPA that are selecting first.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, and it is, and just to confirm, you shared that in this particular round, if a student's first choice seat is not available, then they are given the opportunity to select their second. And if that's not available, then they're given the opportunity to select their third.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Next slide. This is just a clarification which Ms. Hogan kind of went over already, but that I think when we initially, the working group initially made a recommendation, it was for medium household income, but that was put forward in the final recommendation adopted was the median family income with children under the age of 18. Next slide, please. So I want to include, there's a special provision for students who are experiencing homelessness, as well as those in DCF care who live outside of Boston. So those students will be placed in a separate zip code, so they will have their own zip code. And that zip code will be treated as a zip code with the lowest median family income with children under the age of 18. So that would mean that those students within that zip code would be placed first in each round. The same rules still apply in terms of the students being ranked by GPA and the students with the highest GPA being placed first and so forth. Also, the provision for the random number still applies in the case that we have 2 or more students with the same exact GPA. Next slide, please. So the last piece is just there were some additional recommendations that the committee made. One was to ensure that there was academic support for students prior to the start of the new school year. So during the spring and during the summer, the district will be looking to provide programming for students. Secondly, that we would expand our existing exam school initiative, which has primarily served grade 6. And then this last year, we served 5th grade. So that would start as early as the 4th grade and run through October. So it usually starts in the summer, but it would go through to October. And students would be able to participate from grades 4 to 6. Again, focus on academic acceleration in both ELA and math. Additionally, the working group did recommend, and it was adopted, to remove 2 current policies. One is called non-traditional entry, which had not been used in many, many years, since 1992, where individuals could apply directly to a school doing a essay process or an interview process. That was voted to be removed. And secondly, a deferment of acceptance, which had been used and over the last few years, about 1 to 2 students per year, but it's essentially allowing a family to defer taking their exam school seat until the next school year. So that also was removed. And I want to just apologize. I said that the non-traditional entry had not been used since 1992. That is not correct, but I believe it had been over 20 years since it had been used by any families.
Okay, so just to confirm, and just so that, because I know the slide says proposed vote, so I just want to be clear that this was presented to the school committee and the school committee approved all of these recommendations. So these are actually represent the policy on the books.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Is that the last slide?
That is the last slide.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's come off and so we can see one another again here. Let me just, for the task force members, are there any questions that you have for clarification or additional information? Want to make sure that this is reflective of our collective understanding.
Just one question, Madam Co-Chair, with respect to the very first thing that Monica, thank you for your excellent summation of one long summer's work. But when does this, so if we were to decide to just not do a thing, when does this policy, when does this adaptation toll and the existing policy, the previous policy kick in if it were not to be altered?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, this process being applied for only this school year would mean that by the fall, we would have to be announcing for families, and really ideally by August, announcing for families what the process will be for next year. If we were going with our traditional process, usually in August, we are informing families of the application process and timeline, and they're starting to pull their things together. And by November, we're giving an assessment for the exam school entrance. So I believe that is why the body's work is being pushed towards May of this year in terms of a recommendation.
So just to be clear, it's an automatic reversion. So there's no need for any action on the part of the school committee. It would automatically revert back to the 50% grade, 50% assessment, absent the school committee taking a different action. So there would have to be action on the part of the school committee to do something different. Great question.
Yep.
Any others?
If I may, I would like to add that the timeline we've established is to ensure what both Ms. Roberts and Ms. Sullivan have brought to everyone's attention. And that's why we have moved to try to complete this process by the school committee meetings in June, so that the district can then prepare for whatever it is that the school committee votes that this task force has recommended.
Great. Ms. Garrett, I saw your hand.
Yes, I just wanted to add one small detail of the policy, which is that 8th graders at exam schools were not included in the pool. And that I also just wanted to add on to Mr. Acevedo's question about the current year policy and just reference, I know that's not what we're discussing, but renewing the policy for another year hypothetically also does not work, considering that we were using pre-COVID grades, which would now be considerably expired. So just another reason that to underscore the 1 year provision that deferring to 2 years ago's worth of grades does not feel fair to students' current assessment.
Well, that would be for discussion and debate.
Oh, sorry.
but appreciate you putting it into the space.
Right. You're right. Sorry, I should frame it this way, Ms. Sullivan. It wouldn't reflect the same distance of time as it would for the current model. That it wouldn't be reflective of the students' 5th grade year to use pre-COVID grades, should we choose to do that, would be a more accurate statement. Thank you for that correction.
Any other questions? Or
Before we move on, Ms. Sullivan, if there are no more questions, my apologies, I did not introduce our sign language interpreters. And I would like Erin and Celia to just sort of, they've already been working, but I wanted to make sure that we gave them due notice.
welcome.
Thank
you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay. I mean, this is not a speak now or forever hold your peace situation. This is just a good break, pause point before we move to the next session. But again, wanting to make sure that that we all have the same understanding of kind of our current state. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Appreciate it. I am now going to turn it over to Ms. Hogan, Ms. Nagasawa, and Mr. Kreger for our next segment. And I may pause and ask clarifying questions similarly.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sullivan. We just wanted to do a short presentation of 3 other districts in the country who have a selective admission school and share a little bit more about the process they use. I will preface this with, I am not an expert in their processes. So I will answer questions that I do know the answer to based on their other districts' websites. And if there are additional questions, we're happy to try and make connections and learn more. But just wanted to give an example of some of the things other districts are doing. So we'll start with Chicago. I think Chicago has been mentioned a couple of times, so wanted to provide a little more detail on how their process works. So students submit an application that includes GPA, math, English, science, and social studies, as well as standardized test scores and a selective enrollment admissions exam. The difference here between test scores and a selective enrollment admissions exam, which is something we see in multiple districts, is a selective enrollment admissions exam would be taken specifically for the purposes of admission, whereas a standardized test score is typically given analogous to our MCAS or other state tests where all students take the test and it's not necessarily for admissions purposes specifically. Additionally, each applicant is assigned a tier, which is based off of the census tract that they live in. So those tiers are determined using an index that uses different information from the American Community Survey. So they use median family income, adult educational attainment, home and ownership rates, the prevalence of single parent households and non-native English speakers. They did additionally add in a later iteration of this, the test scores in the local elementary school. And so all of that data is combined to give each census tract a tier. There are 4 tiers and each tier has approximately 1/4 of Chicago's school-age children. So they're equally sized, with tier 1 representing the lowest SES socioeconomic status and tier 4 representing the highest. So then how they actually allocate seats from there, 30% of seats are allocated to the top scoring applicants, regardless of what tier. So sort of like a citywide ranking process. And then the remaining seats are divided equally amongst the 4 SES tiers. So that's 17.5% of seats are allocated to each tier. And this is for, I believe, 6 selective enrollment high schools. I'm gonna pause. Ms. Nagasawa, I know you've done a lot of looking into Chicago, so happy to have, if you have anything to add. I'm certainly not a deep expert, but.
I think you summed it up very well. Unless there are questions, then I think this is a great summary.
So I thank you both. I actually do. I just want to go back and just make sure that we're all on the same page here. So with respect to the application score, so it's like it will be a composite score that takes into consideration these 3 factors or inputs.
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know offhand how they are weighted together, but we can certainly find that out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
don't
And, oh, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't believe there's any specific weight. I believe they're weighted equally.
Oh, so each of the three. Okay, very helpful. And with respect to census tract, could you talk a little bit more about what that is? So that people can understand, what is a census tract?
So through the US Census process, they create basically like divisions of a city to create smaller groups, I guess, is a way to explain it. Something that's smaller than zip codes, smaller than, you know, like your neighborhood construct, a way for them to divide up the city based on population. That was not a very eloquent explanation. So if anyone has a better explanation, happy to have them chime in.
Wonderful. I'm gonna, I see Ms. Tung and Mr. Kreger both have their hands raised. Do either of you want to respond, or I can, Ms. Tung, to that question, or did you have a different question? Sorry. Or
I think she might be frozen.
Okay. I am happy to respond to provide greater, more clarification regarding census tract, but I want to see if Matt were you responding to that, or did you have a different question?
No, I wasn't responding to that. And
okay. So so that was super helpful. I just want to make sure that, again, because we use these terms, that it's clear for all of us. So a census tract is usually kind of more specific, more granular than a zip code. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah.
Ms. Hogan? Okay. Okay. All right, great. Super helpful. I want to thank you. I want to go to the hands raised. Mr. Kreger.
I really just wanted to make sure that not only the task force, but that those who are tuning in to view this know that the beauty of this overview is that this helps to paint a picture of what's happening across the country, something that we're going to be exploring more deeply as we move forward. So, for example, at our next session on the 30th, we'll be hearing directly from Rick Kallenberg and Michelle Burris of the Century Foundation, who worked to design or helped to design the Chicago model that we're talking about now, and have been doing the same thing in Charlotte recently. And so we have the opportunity to use this overview now to get the basics, so to speak, of how this is working, and then explore these models more deeply, including with the people who developed them.
Thank you. Ms. Aguirre?
Yes, I would like to have some clarification on the application scores. Are each one of these things like weighted equally, or do they have different weights? And also for each one of the tiers, 17.5% of seats are allocated for each tier. Do these seats go to the applicants with the highest scores, or how are the seats allocated?
Great question. Ms. Hogan, Ms. Nagasawa?
Both really good questions. I do not have answers readily available that I feel 100% confident in. So I'm going to take notes unless Ms. Nagasawa, offhand, and we can definitely follow up.
Yes. So in the tier calculations, all factors are weighted equally. And I am fairly sure that the 17% go to the top ranked students in order. But I am not 100% certain on that.
So we'll get confirmation on the weighting and whether or not in Chicago they weight the three kind of criteria that go into the creation of the composite score. That would be helpful to know. And also get confirmation that students with the highest score in each tier have the opportunity or receive an invitation. I think it would also be helpful to know how so like when I think about our process, we allocate seats in rounds, so you don't have any one particular zip code having access to the full swath of seats before other zip codes do. So it would be interesting to understand how they order the tiers when it comes to allocation of seats as well.
I'm also wondering, because they have more than one high school, if they do any designation by school in terms of number of seats, if they're trying to allocate equally across all 4 tiers. I know I'm meant to be presenting, but
that's a great question. Sorry, my apologies to our interpreters for speaking out of turn. I'm sorry, I just made your job more difficult. Ms. Hogan, yes, I mean, this is definitely, that's absolutely a question we should explore. That's right. It's great. It's great. Okay, let's go to the next one.
So the next slide is about San Francisco. And I will preface this with saying that this is their previous process. They have actually voted to adopt a full lottery system for their school called Lowell High School, not to be confused with Lowell, Massachusetts. But so this was in place prior to COVID. And so they actually have 3 qualification methods. The majority of their admissions are based solely on grades and test scores. So that's about 70% of their assignment offers. And then they have 2 additional bands, which are each about 15%. In band 2, there is a minimum GPA and test score requirement. And then they have school-based committees review grades to sort of make the recommendation of which students to invite.
I'm sorry, which band is that?
That's in this band 2. Right here, the score from, I don't actually know if you can see my mouse.
Okay, yes. Okay, yes, I can actually. Thank you. That's super, super helpful.
I don't have the details on sort of how that evaluation process works, but that is definitely something that we can try and get more information on. And then in band 3, there is, again, grades and test scores incorporated, as well as they look at what they call band 3 identified schools. So these schools are identified as underrepresented using data from the last 3 years of student population. So thinking about which schools are not sending as many students to Lowell High School and trying to increase the number of invitations to students from those schools. And then these assignment offers are based on principal recommendation. So I think this is another, a different example of trying to increase underrepresentation using the school that students are coming from rather than geography, which is what Chicago was using with census tract. So
So question for you, just if you know or not, the SBAC test, what is that?
That is their equivalent of the MCAS. It's I believe it's Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium.
Okay, so it's
standardized test.
So it is, so they take either scores from their SBAC test, or there's an admissions, like a separate distinguished admissions test for the school itself. So it's either or.
Yes.
Okay, and they use grades. Okay.
Ms. Sullivan, can I,
Yes, and I can't, so for the task force, I cannot see you anymore. So I will need you to either just speak up or raise your hand. So yes, Mr. Contreras.
yeah, thank you. This is a request from Ms. Hogan. As you look into this, and as you mentioned, San Francisco has gone to a full lottery. Can you, as you look into it, determine whether there are any prerequisites to get into the lottery? Whether there's a specific GPA or, you know, whatever, having completed Algebra 1 by the 8th grade, so that it's whether indeed there are any other requirements prior to the lottery taking place.
That is a good question. I do not know, but we can definitely
thank you.
Look into that.
Thank you. Super helpful. Great question. I have Ms. Grassa, Ms. Scarrett, and then Ms. Tung.
I actually had the same question as Mr. Contampasas. I wanted to know a little bit about their shift. I would also just like to add on, is that a one-year shift or is that their permanent new policy?
The first vote they did was a one-year shift. I believe they have since taken a second vote to make it permanent, but we can also double verify that as well.
When you say the first vote, when you say first vote, what did that apply to? Do you know?
They initially were taking a vote for a one-year suspension.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. Ms. Scarrett.
Thank you. My question was about the two different exams, just as we're looking deeper into this policy, the use of, I imagine that the SBAC is, since it's equivalent to our MCAS, it's probably only available to a subset of students, which is why they have to also do another test. Wondering if they do a in-house alignment of those two exams, or whether there are set aside seats for each group depending on the exam that they take. I'm just trying to learn more about how they reconcile two different assessments being used in one band.
It's a great question that we'll try to learn more about the answer to.
Okay. How they, because ultimately it's a combination of the grades and whichever test that they take. Okay. Good. Ms. Tung.
Thank you. I'm curious about the process that the San Francisco community took for the vote to go straight lottery this year. Was it similar to ours with a task force and that was appointed by the school committee and then a school committee vote? You know, and I'm interested what the community reaction and support for this policy was.
Yep. Sorry, I'm writing down all of your questions.
And I think on that one, it might be helpful, I mean, separate and, I mean, so about the process, it would be helpful to understand the process as articulated. I also think it might be helpful on this one to, and I know that the team has been trying to identify different districts, schools, where it might be helpful to have teams come in to talk, a panel come in to talk specifically about what's happening. And so it sounds like San Francisco may be one where we might want to hear again on from a panel that based in San Francisco that might be able to provide more detail with respect to some of these questions. On community sentiment, I think that might have to be something that we each explore. Let us think about whether it's, I'm hesitant to say that we would put together a portfolio of articles because I don't want to be in a situation where where we pull some and don't pull all. So something to think about yeah.
Sorry. Would it also be helpful for example, in gauging the community reaction and what the school committee then ended up doing, it might be helpful to have contact between members of our school committee and someone from the school committee in San Francisco to discuss how all of this came about.
You mean, and you're talking about all of that happening as part of our task force meetings, right?
Yeah, if for example, if Ms. Hogan runs into difficulty trying to get some of this information.
Yes.
Vice Chair O'Neill and Chairwoman Davila have indicated that they would reach out to see if indeed they could communicate with folks that are also on the committee in San Francisco, for that matter, in all of the districts we look at. Just another option.
Yes. Ms. Lum.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I'm just curious if representation is one of the objectives or the objective for any of these policies, what the before and after picture are with regards to how much improvement these different policies were actually able to achieve.
So I don't know if we know for sure what the impetus is or was for any of these policy shifts. So that would be something that we would have to ask those districts in order to know.
Or perhaps rephrase to see if there was an impact on representation, if that wasn't a defined objective.
I think that's something that we can, as part of any presentation, from those districts that we could certainly ask about. Great. Are we ready for the next one? It looks like it.
And so this is the last district we'll talk about today. Detroit up in Michigan. So they have both an exam as well as an application. This application includes an essay, their GPA, as well as references who may be contacted. Through that process, applicants get scored on each item. And through the scoring process, they actually award bonus points to current students of their school district, as well as they have a catchment area around the selective high school. And so students who live within 1 mile receive 10 additional points, and those who live within 2 miles receive an additional 5 points on their application. So a different way of looking at geography than what we talked about with the Chicago census tract model.
So this gives points to BPS, to DPS students. Yes. So that is something that, you know, we've heard in our, you know, from, you know, testimony, you know, around, you know, BPS students. We've heard that since the fall. I would put this on our kind of list of things for us to explore and, you know, see if it is possible legally. And if it is not, for us to be able to, you know, bring that back to the task force so that we know kind of, again, as we get to the putting pen to paper, we know kind of what we can and cannot consider. But this process does provide Detroit Public Schools students, they call it with the bonus points, but a little extra credit here. So helpful. Any questions, Roseanne, Ms. Tung?
Just, I might have missed it because I have bad internet, but what is the process that they're using because of the pandemic?
That is a good question. I am not sure offhand, but we can certainly follow up. They might have still given the exam, but I would need to verify that. I don't know for sure.
If I may.
Yes.
Ms. Hogan, is there, can you determine how many schools participate in this process? Is this a single high school? Are there multiple selective high schools in Detroit? And then secondly, I have a process question. Does a student apply to the district or do they apply to an individual school? The reason I raise this is that all of the other criteria would require someone or some unit looking at all of that data, which would then, you know, raise an issue of who's actually reading the essay, who's doing the reference checks, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I know you don't know the answer to
Yeah,
that.
I hate to keep repeating myself, but I don't want to tell you anything
Understood.
unfactual. And we have connected with Detroit, and I believe we'll be able to have some more in-depth conversations with them. And so it's great to hear your questions to get more detailed answers.
Yes, super helpful. I think, you know, with Detroit is another one. It would be great if we're able to get a panel with Detroit. That would be helpful because of their use of a portfolio approach. You know, it would be helpful, as Mr. Contampasa shared, to understand how they get it done. How they are able to, you know, ensure that every student is getting a fair evaluation. Using, again, kind of this portfolio approach.
Yep.
Any other, I don't see any other hands raised. Again, I am not able to see each of you at this moment. So I think we're all set. So Ms. Hogan, Ms. Nagasawa, thank you so very much. I think with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Kreger. Is he still with us or did you have to
He
jump?
actually had to leave to teach a class.
Okay, we can go to the next. I can run through this. There's a deck. So I'll stick to the script here on the deck. And if there are any specific questions, he can answer them in our next session. So if we could go to the next slide. As we move through this process, it will be critically important for us to, make sure that as we're exploring different options for our recommendations, both developing the pool of applicants as well as whatever mechanism we think is appropriate, that we are certainly keeping in mind legal and liability considerations. And so again, I'm going to just literally read from the slides. If there are specific questions that come up, we will take them down and we can do some follow-up at our upcoming meeting. So first three kind of main points here. One, Boston can review admissions proposals for their impact on racial diversity. So this gets to, I think, Ms. Lum, your question, I think when we were talking about San Francisco. Second, Boston must start by assessing race neutral and generalized race conscious approaches that do not treat individual students differently based on race. Third, if none of those policies achieve diversity, Boston can consider race as an individual factor so long as the policy is narrowly tailored. We'll go to the next slide. Boston has been, well, up to this actually this needs to be updated. Boston has been sued at least twice for its use of race in exam school admissions. McLaughlin in 1996. It was a case involving Boston's, at that point in time, set-aside plan developed under desegregation, which reserved 35% of the seats for underrepresented students. It was not narrowly tailored to achieve diversity. And, a couple of concerns that were raised with that particular policy was that, one, there was no end date for the policy. And again, this was an explicit set aside of seats. And Boston had not considered race neutral alternatives. The second was the Westman case in 1998. This plan sought to fill half of each exam school seats with the highest scoring applicants, and then distributed the rest based on the racial diversity of the remaining qualified applicants. This was found to be unconstitutional. Why? The Federal Appeals Court said there was no interest in diversity. However, the US Supreme Court has changed the law on this. We'll go to the next slide. Schools have a constitutional, compelling interest in achieving racial diversity and avoiding racial isolation, but if race is used as a factor in individual student admissions decisions, even in affirmative action cases, courts will apply the highest level of scrutiny under the Equal Protection Clause, so it's called strict scrutiny, to determine if the admissions policy is narrowly tailored to achieve the school's interest in diversity. Narrowly tailored, so specific and intentional, narrowly tailored. Next slide, please. How do you know if a policy is narrowly tailored? One, the district considered race-neutral alternatives and found that none worked to achieve diversity, race neutral. Two, the policy provides for, quote, flexible and individualized review of students, meaning race is not the sole factor for admission. Three, the policy minimizes any undue burden on other students. Four, the policy is limited in time and subject to periodic review. Next slide, please. Okay. UT Austin is an example that we want to share with you at this time. To help describe what a narrowly tailored admissions policy looks like. UT Austin, the top 10% of students in the state's public schools automatically get a seat at UT Austin, which is the state's flagship school. For the remaining seats, UT Austin uses holistic criteria. So that includes essays, letters of recommendations, test scores, etc. UT Austin does consider race along with a host of other demographic information, but as a, quote, factor of a factor of a factor. And only since determining that the top 10% plan alone, and only after determining that the top 10% plan alone would not improve racial diversity. Finally, that admissions policy is subject to continual review. Next slide, please. The question that has come up is, can schools value racial diversity without receiving strict scrutiny? In the 2007 parents involved case that went up to the United States Supreme Court, in Justice Kennedy's concurrence, we have 3 points that are of relevance to this question. One, schools are not prohibited from examining the racial makeup. Two, schools can adopt race-neutral measures to improve diversity. For example, socioeconomic status and parental income. And schools can adopt generalized race-conscious policies so long as policies do not treat individual students differently based on their race. This is unlikely to demand strict scrutiny. Next slide, please. If there is one, I can't remember. Okay, good. Examples of race-neutral factors could include socioeconomic status, parental education, single or dual parent households, neighborhood socioeconomic status or housing composition, for example, single-family homes or subsidized public housing. Those are examples of race neutral. Generalized race conscious criteria could include prioritized admission from certain schools based on racial composition, or prioritizing admission from certain neighborhoods based on racial composition, so long as all students from those neighborhoods or schools were treated the same regardless of their race. We go to the next slide, please. So main takeaways or key takeaways here. Boston can review admissions proposals for racial impact impact on racial diversity. Boston must start by assessing race neutral and generalized race conscious approaches that do not treat individual students differently based on their race. And 3, if none of those policies achieve diversity, Boston can consider race as an individual factor so long as the policy is narrowly tailored. I do want to draw your attention to the links the link that is at the bottom page. There's an opportunity there if folks want to explore this a little bit more independently. The link there is to some additional guidance documents from the Department of Education. Do I have one more slide?
That's the last one.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure. I was like, do I have one more? I can't remember. So that was super helpful. So we wanted to go through that whole piece again as we start to move closer to putting that pen to paper. And certainly to the extent there are specific questions as we move through this process. I want to make sure that we're asking them. Let's put them on the table, and we can and will have the support we need in order to explore them all. So whether we're talking about more information about what's happening in other districts, or we want to understand, we talked, Ms. Tung raised the question about community sentiment. We may also want to explore student sentiment in some of these other jurisdictions. We can seek the information. We will also have the opportunity throughout this process. We are thrilled to be supported by Ms. Hogan and Ms. Roberts, but we recognize that they are balancing a lot with their respective district responsibilities. So we are going to have some additional support for them, specifically around our data and research requests. So as you have them, we'll, again, Ms. Hogan will do her best, but we're also going to have some additional supports to help with that so we can get our questions answered. And then, similar to this last piece, as we move through this process, there may be legal questions that come up. And so, of course, the district has legal counsel, but we're also seeking to have some additional supports there to the extent that there are questions that come up and we want to have or need to have a little bit of research done so that we make sure that we're staying on path. So I'm very pleased that I know tonight we have Mr. Keating joining us, just observing for tonight. But my point in sharing that is to say that we are moving into our process where we're continuing to learn together. But in a few short weeks, we're going to start again, kind of throwing out ideas about what this policy could or should look like. And I want to make sure that the questions are not held back, but that we ask the questions and that we try to get the best answers that we can. Mr. Contopasis?
No, I think, first of all, I want to commend you on your presentation of Mr. Krager's slides. You did an outstanding job.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add is Mr. Kennedy's decision on the Supreme Court with the 5-4 decision.
Yep.
And it is extremely tenuous. And we need to keep that in mind as well as we go through this process. Because as we all know, the decisions at the Supreme Court are oftentimes pendulous. they move backwards and forwards depending on who might be sitting on it. But what Justice Kennedy's majority vote did is left the window open. And it has been used successfully to address concerns similar to what we are dealing with here in Boston. And so I would also like to welcome Attorney Keating. He will provide support to the task force exclusively and will be available to answer along with Mr. Krager. He's not going anywhere. Will give us the appropriate, will tell us when we're out of line and will give us the appropriate direction as necessary.
Yeah, Mr. Contempas, just one note here, because I want to make sure that we're, just one small little detail. So Justice Kennedy's opinion was, it was a concurrence opinion,
Yep.
right? And so but what's significant about it is that it was an opinion that was indeed, as you noted, signed on to by a majority of the court. And thus, in many respects, it is considered to be the opinion that provides the greatest guidance in this space as it relates to the law on this particular issue. And as you know, it is particularly important, not just in this space, but in any space where we are exploring issues that could have an impact on race, that we are mindful and conscious of where our guardrails are. But at the same time, I don't want the guardrails to create fear. Like, we're not trying, there shouldn't be a fearful process for anybody. But it is to say that as we move through this process, we're going to have support on data. We're going to have support from a legal standpoint. We're going to have support, hopefully, from our colleagues in other parts of the country who sit on school boards and are in district offices and in schools. We have a lot of resources available to us, and so that's a good thing. Mr. Acevedo.
Ms. Sullivan, I wanted to echo, you did a masterful job of going through that case law, which my take on it was this. I mean, as someone with a law degree, I mean, it was decades ago, but you don't ever get that stuff out of your system. So I find it fascinating. But even as you were sharing this, it reminded me, as you speak of guardrails, I'm imagining this work that we're doing is really having two sets of guardrails, one to the left of us or whatever, one to the right. One of those guardrails that we're, and both of these are constraining and refining our work here. Mm-hmm. One of those guardrails is, community voices, mm-hmm. One side or another on this issue. Mm-hmm. And many of those community voices, the grand majority, folks we love, with whom we identify with, our communities, most of our folks have no patience for legal, quote, legal niceties. Mm-hmm. And the other guardrail, of course, is the fact that if there is a quintessential legal constitutional issue, it's the one we're working on. This is the mother lode of civil rights legislation. Mm-hmm. Modern civil rights law began with a school diversity case, the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education. So if there is a red zone for constitutional law, we are sitting on it. This is home base for constitutional litigation in America. I guess what I'm saying is we have to be mindful of both of those voices, both of those guardrails. They're going to be accompanying us the entire way. Community leaders who are saying, why don't y'all just do the right thing? This is ignore that, just set aside, just pick a number, just do it, or just ignore it altogether. And meanwhile, somehow we have to translate the realities for folks who want to see these changes become permanent. It's not going to happen unless we pay attention to both of these guardrails.
Mhm.
And you did a great job of keeping that in the foreground.
Thank you. That was really a very important point. Yes, but we still, fortunately, we didn't lose any task force members, as you reminded us all of how significant this is. Everybody's still here, which is wonderful. But indeed, this is the work, and we are going to do it well. And I could not be more honored to be in this work with really anyone else than I am to be in this work with this task force, and to have had so many members of our community, as we started this process, continue to engage and continue to participate, again, has just been so affirming. So this is good. This is good work. Are there any other questions or comments before we close out this segment and move to public comment? Yes, Ms. Lum.
This may be something coming up at a future meeting, so if you don't have an answer now, that's fine. I was unclear as to whether or not the temporary policy that was approved for this year, if the process has already started, and will we be able to see the results of that process and compare it to the modeling that the working group had worked with in order to come up with the policy recommendations?
So the process, we will not have an allocation of seats, or student seat assignments will not happen before April 15th. So, and that is following along with some decisions that were made during the court proceedings over the past couple of months.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, Ms. Parvek. Yes, sir. Yes.
If Ms. Parvek is ready, we should go into.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Ms. Parvek.
Thank you very much. We have 15 speakers this evening, and each speaker will have 2 minutes per person. I will let you know when you have 20 seconds left. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom. And also, please make sure you're signed into Zoom with the same name you used to sign up for public comment. That will allow us to identify you when it's your turn to testify. Our first speaker this evening is Virginia Berman, followed by Marie Mercurio and Dara Murphy. Virginia Berman.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Virginia Berman, a parent at Boston Latin School and co-chair of Families for Equity and Diversity, which works to help create a welcoming environment for all students at BLS. Our membership includes families from across the city, including exam school alumni and parents of 6th graders awaiting a decision. And we're here because we care about BLS and its future. The pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing disparities that limit access to exam schools for Black and Latinx students. Requiring students to take an exam during this time would have been impractical and unsafe, and further burdened the communities already bearing disproportionate impacts. For your recognition of these consequences, we thank you. We also strongly support the working group's proposal developed by thoughtful community leaders, including BLS's own Ms. Scarrett and Mr. Contampasas. The proposal presents the most equitable and realistic approach under the conditions of this school year. It also ensures that the next year, the exam schools will look more like the city of Boston. We look forward to welcoming students from neighborhoods that have not had many students at BLS in the past. Critics say this approach will diminish rigor, and we disagree. Rigor comes from the curriculum, and that will not change. As Mr. Contampasas said, the students under this proposal will have what it takes to succeed. And for decades, students at BLS have been provided a system of supplementary academic supports, which will continue to be offered to students entering this fall. The existing admission system has not always been an effective measure of student potential or merit. Many talented students have been excluded because their families didn't have access to resources to effectively navigate the process. To the students who are coming into 2021, we'll be the first to say welcome, and we know that you will not only thrive in our community, you will enrich it. And to the Exam School Admissions Task Force, we fully support your ongoing efforts to make the exam school entrance process one that promotes opportunity, thereby increasing a more representative BPS student body. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Marie Mercurio.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Marie Mercurio. I live in Jamaica Plain. We have a son at BLS and also a son at the Curley School. We need to keep an objective exam for Boston's exam schools since grading is subjective and it can be gamed. However, it needs to be more fair and accessible such that no one can say, I never knew about it, or I can't pay for it. Here are some ideas. Number one, create communication that is easy to understand, positive, and realistic about exam schools. Messaging is key. Don't glamorize it. It is an opportunity for kids with untapped potential who are willing to learn and put in the effort. Number two, BPS has to be aggressive with this communication. Consider an Exam School 101 session as a separate assembly for 5th, 7th, and 8th graders in each school. Use young people from exam schools to conduct these sessions, or what about youth from the Boston Student Advisory Council? Any written materials should be provided in various languages. Use the Boston Public Schools weekly update and other BPS email communication and robocalls to talk about these sessions. Use social media. This 101 session could also be done on weekends at libraries, BCYF, BHA, and other nonprofit community centers. Target large affordable housing developments. Get access to their tenant associations and their offices to find the best way to spread information about the exam. Is it flyering each door? Do they have an email listserv? Do they use social media? Number three, provide information on where to get study books and practice materials. Create a program for lower income families to access these books at a reduced rate or free. Number four, contract with the company to provide in-person free or sliding scale summer and fall tutoring sessions. If too expensive, make it virtual. We have all figured out Zoom. Work with libraries and community centers to offer these sessions online if Wi-Fi is a barrier at home. Lend out the thousands of pandemic issued Chromebooks. Number five, resume the exam in BPS schools. You could also hold them at BCYF, BHA, or other nonprofit community centers. Make it easy and comfortable for kids to take it close to home. Provide buses if needed. Number six, resume exam administration through BPS at no cost. Families who want to take it in a smaller setting will pay to do so. I'll stop for now because I've probably run out of time, but I will keep my ideas flowing. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Dara Murphy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. My name is Dara Murphy. I'm from Dorchester. With regard to Ms. Sullivan's slides just now, the zip code plan does treat individual students differently based on their race. Individual Asian students in predominantly Asian zip codes are being excluded from admission because Asian students historically perform better on exams and report cards. The zip code allocation was intended to reduce Asian students at BLS, and it will succeed if allowed to proceed. I urge this task force to focus more on equitable opportunities and less on equitable outcomes. The zip code quota plan attempts to engineer a predetermined racially balanced outcome for the races of students at the exam schools by redlining predominantly Asian zip codes in order to reduce the number of successful Asian applicants to the exam schools. BPS now faces a federal lawsuit credibly accusing this body's zip code quota plan of discriminating against Asian children specifically. The Rappaport Institute recently published a report that addresses the relatively low number of Black students enrolled at BLS and makes specific suggestions for remedying the problem. They recommend using an admission test like MAPS, standardized and consistent grading across BPS, and better outreach to BPS students. And most importantly, the most urgent remedy that is needed is to increase the number of Black students enrolled at Boston Latin School by improving the academic quality of our elementary schools, where more than 70% of our students fail MCAS year after year. I urge the superintendent to redirect the work of this group to focus on the real problem that results in the lower number of Black students enrolled at BLS. Spending time and money now, excluding Asian kids to create seats for Black kids, is counterproductive to the goal of equity. Standardize the grading system, administer MAPS, and most importantly, improve the quality of our grade schools. This work is slower and more challenging, but it is the only way that lasting and real equity for Black and Hispanic students at BLS will be achieved at all the exam schools, a goal we all share. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Nora McCanus Vincent, followed by Christine Johnson and Fred Pusillo. Nora?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening. My name is Nora McManus Vincent. I live in West Roxbury, and my two children are in grades 3 and K2 at the Bates in Roslindale. I am fully in support of this long overdue effort to expand the applicant pool for selective admission high schools in Boston. I understand that an expansion will almost certainly decrease the likelihood that my own children will be offered admission, since under the current system, they're disproportionately advantaged. In thinking about what to say tonight to you all, I kept coming back to a memory of when I first registered my oldest child for K1. As I sat in the BPS Welcome Center, I overheard a staff member discussing high school enrollment with another mom. The staffer showed this other mom, who presented as Latinx, the Discover BPS website and how to compare offerings of high schools, like what sports programs they have. I distinctly remember the mom saying, "Oh yes, he likes baseball," and the staffer saying something like, "Well, then there you go." And that was pretty much it. The mom went about searching through the website at the computer kiosk, and the staffer moved on to helping the next person. I glanced around, confused. That was it? Just pick a school with a baseball team? This could not have been more different from the conversations I'd been party to among mostly wealthy, mostly white families in West Roxbury, and my oldest child was only 3 years old. I already knew that the disparities in programming, facilities, and resources at schools were stark, so it was shocking to me that there was not some acknowledgement, even a subtle one, of the two-tiered system in the exchange I had just witnessed. But of course, this is part of how the two-tiered system works. We quietly but consistently guide children and families from some Boston neighborhoods along a path of chronically underfunded and under-resourced schools, while ushering the disproportionately white wealthy students from the wealthiest neighborhoods down their own separate path.
20 seconds.
This group disproportionately gets access to the schools with the most resources because the resources come from philanthropy and private fundraising for only those schools. The disparities in what we offer children are stunning, and the silence around just how great the disparities are continues even as this task force meets. Seeking new ways to connect young people from all of Boston's neighborhoods to our most fully resourced schools is a small step toward repaying the education debt this city owes so many. I look forward to a day when access to resource-rich schools for their children is treated as a right of all Boston families and not a luxury for a few. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Christine Johnson.
Hi there, can you hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
My name is Kristen Johnson. I'm a BPS parent living in Jamaica Plain. I'm here tonight representing the Boston Coalition for Education Equity. Our coalition, composed of civil rights groups, parent groups, teachers, progressive and education organizations, strongly supports this task force plan to reform the admission system for Boston's 3 exam schools. We oppose any attempt to revert to the status quo. Opponents of reforming exam school admissions repeatedly refer to seats that certain neighborhoods are expected to lose under the new plan. They have charts that show the same predictable number of seats that have been funneled to their neighborhoods for decades. That statement exposes how reliably the old admission system protected inequitable access to exam schools for families in a small handful of Boston neighborhoods. We can all agree that there are smart children in every zip code and every neighborhood in Boston. What's not distributed evenly is opportunity, including the opportunities that lead to high test scores or A+ grades in the semesters just prior to exam school admission. By allocating 80% of seats to students ranked within zip codes, this year's revised system allows students to compete with others who have similar life circumstances. It may not be the solution you implement permanently, but it's certainly more equitable than the old system. We urge you to implement a permanent system that will ensure the opportunities presented by the exam schools are available to all students in every Boston neighborhood. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Fred Pusillo.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Fred Pacillo. I live in East Boston. My child is a student at Boston Latin School. Many parents know there's a system to be worked to increase a child's odds of getting into an exam school. It's a system that has little to do with that child's potential. It involves the so-called right elementary schools, often private ones, the right tutor with a proven student admission success rate, the right neighborhood. In my neighborhood of East Boston, I've talked with parents who had no idea of this system, or if they did, had very little opportunity to participate in it. They were immersed in working another system. For one friend, this meant time away from her kids on a 2.5-hour commute by train and 2 buses out to an office park to clean. For another, it meant having her teenager feed and put her younger kids to bed while she worked night shifts. For many, there isn't enough money for internet, never mind private school or private tutoring. But the kids I know from these families are no less intelligent, have no less inherent potential than the kids I know whose parents have been planning and spending for their exam school path from birth. I have other friends who lament the seats they expect their neighborhood to lose under these reforms. I lament the decades of seats which could have been filled by talented, capable kids who just were not able to participate in the system that secures many exam school spots. That's a loss not just for them, but for our entire city. Allocating 80% of the seats by ranking students within zip codes will be a step towards developing the talents of kids from all neighborhoods, including those we've been comfortable ignoring while busy taking care of our own. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Ellen King. I do not see anyone with that name. If Ellen King is there, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we have Latoya Gale. Latoya, I don't see Latoya Gale either. Olivia Paquette.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Olivia Paquette. I'm an alum of Boston Latin School and I'm a BPS educator and I live in Cambridge. As an alum of Boston Latin School and as an educator in a BPS non-exam high school, I'm here to voice my support for permanent change to the exam school admissions process. I had a great experience as a student at BLS, but at the time I didn't realize how my story was typical of the way education operates in Boston through a scarcity mindset, with the underlying expectation that some children will access opportunity and some won't. I grew up white in JP and attended a suburban Catholic elementary school with predominantly white classmates, mainly from West Roxbury, JP, and the suburbs. In the 6th grade, we were given ISE practice after school, and most parents paid for private test prep tutoring to try to make sure their child could get into an exam school or a private school. BPS is a public service and should be serving all of the public of Boston. At a minimum, entrance into a public exam school should not require having enough money to pay for private school or tutoring. As an alum, I fully support the suspension of the entrance exam and the adoption of criteria that take into account neighborhood equity, socioeconomic inclusion, and racial diversity. This is especially important in a city as economically, socially, and racially segregated as Boston, and the admissions process needs to reflect that reality. But I also echo the joint statement put out by the Coalition of Community Groups on March 2nd that says educational equity is not a zero-sum game. And to quote a statement that stood out to me, the inequity of resources and opportunities in BPS creates a scarcity mindset, which leaves many families feeling that the exam schools are one of the only opportunities for a quality education. And this stood out to me because every child in Boston deserves a quality education, and is in a city that's as rich and well-resourced as Boston, we have a very long way to go to allocate adequate resources to all of our public schools. So to quote this statement again, the most important path to educational equity is to improve all public schools in the city, not just focus on admission into the 3 elite exam schools. All students deserve to feel like they have won the lottery, no matter what BPS school they attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Anne Malone, followed by Paula Elliott and Joyce Chalfin. Anne Malone. Anne, could you unmute yourself? No, for some reason she's not responding. Paula Elliott. I don't see anyone with that name signed in. Joyce Chalfin. I don't see anyone with that name either. Leslie Kiley. Leslie Kiley. Catherine Kilburn.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, thank you.
Okay, great. We must develop policy changes that provide equity of opportunity in general, rather than continuing down the same well-traveled road of recreating solely merit-based policies. If we do not want what we currently have, public yet exclusive exam schools, which the majority of Boston public school children cannot attend, and want equitable public education in those schools, then we must create equitable admissions policies. This is at its heart an issue of democracy. We are not working in a vacuum. Right now, across our nation, we're in the midst of confronting the most critical and widespread challenge to our democracy that we have experienced since the era of Jim Crow. That struggle is the struggle to eradicate voter suppression. The various methods of voter suppression mapped out in hundreds of bills across the US are rooted in racism, but masked so as not to appear racist. Here today, we're engaged in a struggle that echoes many of the same issues. At its essence, we are attempting to root out education suppression. When we are honest, we know that our educational system is far from equitable and that white privilege pervades our public school system. We see it in the overrepresentation of Black and Brown students in our public grade schools and middle schools as compared to their numbers in the city's population, and in the overrepresentation of white children in private and public exam schools. And we see a 3-tiered system of exam schools in terms of racial equity that has been created by a solely merit-based admissions policy. This historical moment we find ourselves in, though incredibly disturbing and destabilizing, offers us a rare opportunity to make deep, meaningful, equitable change that's been way put off too long. I'm not here to suggest specific policies. I'm speaking in order to offer guiding principles. Education is one of the main purveyors of opportunity in life, and so I strongly believe that all policy changes this body develops must be based on the fundamental goal, creating equity of opportunity within the new policies themselves. In order to do this, it's essential that we not only include consideration of geographic and socioeconomic factors, but make them an essential component of the new admission system. Given our current inequitable education system and proven exam biases, we cannot have a strictly merit-based system of admissions if we are ever going to accomplish equity of education. Thank you so much for your hard work.
Thank you very much. I see that Leslie Kiley is here, so I will call on her. Or on Leslie Kiley. Please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank
Great,
you.
great. Thank you so much. As the parent of a BLS alumna, as well as a grandparent of 4 children in the Boston Public Schools. I'm here to express my strong support for the task force effort to reform the admission system for Boston's exam schools and to voice my strong opposition to any attempt to revert to the status quo. We can all agree that there are smart children in every zip code and every neighborhood in Boston. What's not evenly distributed or fairly distributed is opportunity, including the opportunities that lead to high test scores or A+ grades. By allocating 80% of seats by ranking students within zip codes, this year's system ensures that talented students from all corners of the city have a chance to achieve their full potential. And we can't let the concerns of those in a handful of Boston neighborhoods who feel that they are expected to lose seats perpetuate the inequity of the old admission system. They have no more right to a set number of seats in any other zip code in Boston. If this past year has taught us anything, it is that challenge and hardship are not evenly shared among the people of Boston, nor are opportunity and access. I believe that the task force's efforts are thoughtful, fair, and substantive, and I urge you to implement a permanent system that will also take into account geographic and socioeconomic factors to ensure that our exam schools better reflect the diversity of all the students in our city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Lauren Peter. Lauren Peter. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, thank you for giving me this chance to talk. I am a mother of a BPS student and a person who was part of, sorry, I had to move. Hi, my name is Lauren Peter. I'm a mother of a BPS student. My daughter's only in 1st grade, but I know from my experiences testifying before Boston committees that this will affect her in a minute. I will date myself a bit and state that I was one of the first students affected by the top 10% rule for Texas state colleges. And I will say that the conversations that you're having here in Boston were had all over that state. Conversations about fairness, conversations about maintaining rigorousness. And I can say that only good things happened from changing acceptance criteria. I strongly commend this committee for all of your rigorousness and all of the research that you're doing, and I encourage you to continue. You're not reinventing the wheel, and looking to see what other people are doing is great. The way that we're serving our students needs to change, and the way that we talk about this needs to change, because the way that we're talking about it now says bad things to all of our kids. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk, and I look forward to seeing what decisions are made.
Thank you. I see that Anne Malone is here. Anne Malone.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me now?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I had to switch to my phone. I don't know what that was. So grateful for this opportunity to speak. I live in Jamaica Plain. I'm a white woman. I have 2 white sons. One is a 10th grader at Boston Latin School, and my elder son graduated in 2018. And he was in Boston Public Schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. And I, from early days, started feeling very uncomfortable about the advanced work, and was that tracking, and is that racist? And we tried not to go the advanced work route, but then things were kind of a crisis at the elementary school he was at. And so it's just been a very uncomfortable situation. And then 4 years ago, I took a course, White People Challenging Racism, Moving from Talk to Action. and we looked at the hundreds of years of separate and unequal treatment of different groups in this country, especially Blacks, but then more, recently other groups of color. And I feel like I'm such a part of the problem, and the exam schools are such a big part of the problem. So I am totally in support of this one-year change. And I implore all of us to really think hard and dig deep and look at what opportunity we have to challenge white supremacy in changing this admissions process, and down the road, changing the fact that we have these selective schools that by their very nature are separate and unequal. So I really would just like to, say that I feel like it's a very blatant example of racism to have these selective schools where all the data points to, to the fact that, white people for hundreds of years have had the power, have had the money, and so get access to these kinds of social resources, and it's absolutely unfair. So if not now, then when? And I just happened to come across a Cornell West article. It said, all of us must speak the truth, including painful truths that unsettle not only our foes, but also our friends, and most especially ourselves. So I hope we can all take this opportunity to make some very deep, lasting changes. And it doesn't only happen within the school walls. We have to look at all the other structural pillars of society that are systemically racist: housing, jobs, our economy. And Ibram Kendi would have some wonderful words to add to that. I'm not as articulate, but that's the spirit I want to lift up and say, you have me with you all the way, working group, on this work, and push it forward beyond this year and make it even bolder. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sullivan, Mr. Contompassis, that concludes our speaker for public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Parvex. Before we move to close, I want to open the floor if there are any closing questions or comments from task force members. Ms. Tung.
Hi, I wanted to thank all the folks who provided public testimony, and just request again, as our co-chairs did at the last week's meeting, that it would be great for the task force members to hear from the public about specific policy recommendations or aspects of the admissions recommendations moving forward.
Thank you. Are there any others before we close? Okay, Mr. Contompassis, do you have anything before we close? No? Okay. I want to also thank the members of the public who participated in public comments. Again, appreciate you being with us through this meeting and being on this journey with us as a whole. To Ms. Tung's comments, certainly appreciate some of the recommendations that did come. Most notably, I think it was Ms. Mercurio who provided some specific recommendations. I hope, like Ms. Tung mentioned, that we will have more of that coming from the public, because that too will again kind of help to inform what our recommendations end up being. I want to, as always, thank the BPS team for their support and helping to prep us for today with the presentations, and want to thank our interpreters for 2 hours of great service to the BPS, our families and stakeholders. So thank you to our interpreters. With that, I believe
before we close, if I may, I just want to remind everybody, next Tuesday, we have 2 folks from the Century Foundation who have lived the work of change. And I want to make certain that we have as many people available as we can have to listen to the experience that they've gone through in looking at similar situations that we're facing. And I want to echo what Ms. Sullivan said. The two Monicas are terrific. They could use some additional help given what they're going through on a daily basis. But they continue to want to participate, and I want to thank them as well, and I'm sure you all do. And with that, if there's nothing else, Ms. Sullivan, unless you have something else to close with?
Oh, no. I was just going to entertain a motion to adjourn. That was all.
Great, so moved.
Second.
That was Mr. Contompassus and Ms. Grassa. All right. Ms. Parvex, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Thank you. Mr. Acevedo,
Aye.
Ms. Aguirre,
Yay.
Mr. Kreger, oh, he left. Ms. Grassa,
Aye.
Ms. Lam,
Aye.
Ms. Nagasawa,
Aye.
Ms. Skerrit,
Aye.
Ms. Tang,
Aye.
Ms. Sullivan,
Aye.
and Mr. Contompassus.
Aye.
Unanimous.
Thank
Right.
you. With that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.